Welcome to the Conservation Corps video on Supervision Part 3. The contents of this session that we will cover, we'll talk about the three different roles of supervision, rearranging these roles of supervision, some tools you already have in your toolbox, weathering the storm or the concept of group climate, the reciprocal relationship between group climate and individual behavior, behaviors that create or foster climates, and finally, the effects of supportive and defensive climates on behavior. In terms of the roles of supervision, basically supervisors have three roles. Number one is to assist the work group in accomplishing an assigned task. In this case, the supervisor is engaging in task completion type behaviors that may include such things as clarifying what the task is, directing what needs to be done, modeling or teaching necessary techniques, etc. The second goal is to ensure that the work group is in working order. In this case, the supervisor facilitates the development of effective collaborative relationships by engaging in relationship building behaviors that include cooperation, trust, respect, concern for others, honesty, etc. Number three, the third goal, is to assess the knowledge, skill, and emotional competency levels of individuals in the work group. In this case, the supervisor has gathered information about the individuals within the work group in terms of their strengths, their maturity level, their relationship to authority, their past relationships to authority, their exposure to trauma, the task required competency skill levels that they have, and things like that. Generally, organizations focus most of their energy on number one, having the group complete an assigned task. I'd like to share a little different perspective with you. I'd like you to consider that the foundation for having a group successfully complete a task is number one, first knowing your group members in terms of their strengths and maturity level, relationships to authority, those things that I had just mentioned. And time needs to be spent. Supervisors need time to get to know their group members individually. The second foundation is the idea of keeping the group in working order. If these two pillars are in place, if a supervisor has a good understanding of the individuals within the group, and the group is in working order, then the idea of successful completion of a task will almost take care of itself. Now, I realize that the last statement is somewhat of an oversimplification, but knowing your group well and having the group in good working order can go an awfully long way. So then the $64 question becomes, what are the necessary skills I need to keep the group in working order? Well, to start off with, you already have some tools in your toolbox that may be helpful for you. In the last two videos, we've covered some. Your first tool is your awareness of how individuals develop, change, and learn. After taking the behavior change survey, you should have an idea of the three theoretical positions that are listed right here concerning how individuals develop, change, and learn, and the different intervention strategies that each of these positions implies. You should have an idea of your own tendencies as they relate to these theoretical positions and which position or positions you are most comfortable with. And you can begin to concentrate on honing your skills in implementing the intervention strategies that complement the position or positions that you tend to lean towards. Also, by becoming aware of individual crew members' tendencies concerning these theoretical positions, you can begin to align particular intervention strategies with a particular crew member's expectations about the world. As an example, if you are working with an individual who came from a very dysfunctional family and had experienced emotional and physical abuse, you might infer that this individual was accustomed to being punished and grew up with the assumption that might makes right. You might initially approach this individual with strategies aligned with the rules and rewards position, right over here, since they may match up with the individual's expectations. As your relationship grows and develops, you can then introduce tools from the other theoretical positions. So your self-awareness about how people develop, change, and learn, and your awareness about how individuals you work with view development, change, and learning may make you a more empathic and effective leader and may serve as a valuable tool in keeping the group in working order. So this is a tool that you've had. You should have seen the video on it. Another tool you have at your disposal is the concept of the 5 faces of social power that we went over in the last video, and the implications of coming from each of these power bases has and how it affects participants that you're working with. And as we had discussed, if individuals you work with view you as coming from an expert or principle-centered or referent use of authority, you have done a great job in setting up and keeping the group in working order. So these 5 faces of social authority and power are another tool that you have in your toolbox for keeping the group in working order. Still another tool you have is the situational approach to supervision model and its implications for the type of supervisory role you might use depending on the knowledge base, skill, and resource level of the participants. And we went over this in the last video also, so I won't regurgitate it here. But this has strong implications for how you might intervene depending on the skill level of the participants in your group. So you already have 3 tools in your toolbox. Now I'm going to take a look at the concept of group climate and its importance in keeping the group in working order. Climate can be defined as the dynamic, short-term atmosphere and general motivational tone surrounding a social interaction that affects the intra- and interpersonal communication patterns of the actors within the social interaction. It is the feeling or perception by people in the group of what in the hell is going on here. Group climate is such an important concept because it can actually influence in a positive or a negative way an individual's psychological, emotional, and physical state. It's a very, very powerful concept. And there is a reciprocal relationship between climate and the behaviors of individuals acting within the group or within the climate. If you can influence the climate of a group, you will actually in either positively or negatively, you will actually influence the behaviors of the individuals in the group, either positively or negatively. And that, in turn, influences the development of a new climate. I can't say this enough. This is a very, very powerful concept, a very powerful tool for keeping a group in working order. Because if you are adept at influencing the group climate, you actually can influence the behavior of the group participants. And by so doing, you actually influence the development of a new climate, which in turn will influence the behavior of participants, and so on, and so on, and so on. Well, let's take a look then at some behaviors that tend to foster climates. And for the sake of discussion, let's conceptualize group climate as two extreme ends of a continuum. At one end are supportive climates, and at the other end, defensive climates. And listed on the screen, you can see are a few of the behaviors that actively support or foster supportive climates, and they're listed on the left side here, and behaviors that actually support defensive climates, which are listed on the right side here. As you can see, engaging in active listening, active acceptance of others, recognizing the dignity in others, and being concerned about the welfare of others are some of the behaviors that contribute to the development of a supportive climate. Interestingly enough, they are the very same behaviors that a supervisor who is acting from the referent power or authority position would be engaged in. They're the very same behaviors. Engaging in behaviors that are evaluative of others and tend to criticize or control others are some of the behaviors that contribute to a defensive climate. This implication has some important implications. If the individuals in your working group are engaging in defensive, self-protective, or self-justifying behaviors, you might assess just what is going on to see what might be contributing to their defensiveness. You might engage in an assessment of the group in terms of what behaviors are occurring here, yours as well as the participants in the group. What behaviors are we engaging in? What can you do as a supervisor to counteract the defensive pattern that seems to be building? How can you intervene? Because if you can influence climate, you can influence behavior. And the other thing is, are you in a defensive position, which may lead you to misinterpret the situation that is actually going on? So these are some questions that you could look at in terms of what's going on in the group. And you might take a look at also at what behaviors you're engaging in. What might you be communicating that might be supporting a defensive situation? And how can you intervene and try and manipulate that? And might you be acting in ways that may be causing the defensiveness? Well, okay, now, this is the characteristics of supportive and defensive climates. As you can see on the screen, supportive climates are generally characterized by member behaviors that are descriptive in nature, problem-oriented, spontaneous, empathic, have an atmosphere of equity and equality, and tend to be provisional in nature. In contrast, defensive climates are generally characterized by member behaviors that are evaluative, controlling in nature with an emphasis on strategy and hidden agendas, neutrality, impersonal interactions, and have an atmosphere of superiority, and tend to be dogmatic or certain in nature. We're going to briefly take a look at some of the characteristics of these dyads. So we have descriptive versus evaluative climates. Individuals in supportive climates tend to describe another's behaviors rather than evaluate it. They also tend to focus on what went on or how it happened. Individuals in defensive climates blame others, find fault, and focus on why did you do that? Let me give you an example. His one coworker set up a ladder, and the other coworker was going to get on the ladder and do some work on the ladder. So the coworker that was going to get on, and what happened is when the coworker got on the ladder slipped and the coworker fell off of it, but they were only on the first rung, so it wasn't a big deal. So the coworker who slipped, here's one way of reacting. When you set up the ladder, it wasn't on a solid footing, so when I went to climb up, it tilted and I slipped off. Luckily, I was on the first rung and I wasn't hurt. Now here, the worker described the situation and focused on what happened. The same worker could have came from a defensive position and said something like this: "That was really stupid. Why didn't you set the ladder the right way? You never can do anything right." Here, the participant was blaming, pointing fault, and a focus on why. Why did you do that? So that's sort of the difference between the descriptive and evaluative. Let's take a look at the problem-oriented versus control-oriented. Individuals in supportive climates tend to respond to problems by focusing on the problem, offering suggestions, and attempt to work in collaborative ways to solve the problem. People in defensive climates tend to focus on controlling others and directing them in how they think the problem should be resolved. Here's an example. It sounds like you and your girlfriend are experiencing some difficulty over the way she perceives you're treating her. Oh, that can be a tough situation. I wonder if it might help if you sat down and had a talk with her. Oh, by the way, if there's anything or any way I can help, please let me know. Don't hesitate. So this comes from this is a supportive position, as opposed to the person saying, you know, you need to stand up for yourself and take control of the situation. Act like a man, will you? Here, the individual was telling the participant what to do and how to solve the problem. So that's from a control position. 3, we're looking at spontaneity versus strategy. Individuals in supportive climates tend to be open, no hidden agendas, engage in appropriate self-disclosure, are honest, and focus on the here and now, what's going on right here and now. On the other hand, individuals in a defensive climate may have hidden agendas or ulterior motives, tend to withhold information from the group, and are cautious in their communication styles. Concerning empathy versus neutrality, supportive climates encourage behaviors that show concern for others, engagement in active listening, and the ability to see things from the other person's perspective. Defensive climates encourage behaviors that are impersonal, indifferent, who cares, who gives a shit, apathy, and indicate a lack of concern for others. Concerning equity versus superiority, supportive climates tend to foster behaviors that focus on equity, equality, behaviors that minimize status differences, and not setting people up for ridicule or failure. Defensive climates tend to foster behaviors that amplify status differences and create an us versus them competition and the development of cliques. And by the way, I like to look at this issue of equity versus equality. Equality equals sameness. It promotes fairness and justice by giving everyone the same thing. All three boys had the same box here. But it can only work if everyone starts from the same place. In this example, equality only works if everyone is the same height. Equity is fairness. Equity is about making sure people get access to the same opportunities. Sometimes our differences and/or history can create barriers to participation, so we must first ensure equity before we can enjoy equality. Finally, let's take a look at provisional versus certain. Supportive climates tend to encourage behaviors that are flexible, tentative, with comments like, "we might try," or "we could." Defensive climates encourage behaviors that are dogmatic, closed-minded, focused only on one way, my way or the highway, and alternative views are discouraged and put down. So there are the behavior characteristics of supportive and defensive climates. This could be very valuable information from a supervision point of view, because it may allow you to identify when a climate is becoming defensive or is defensive, and it offers you some tools to intervene in the climate in an attempt to shift its focus to a more supportive position. So now you can add the concept of group climate and the effects of supportive and defensive climates to your toolbox. Quick review. In this session, we talked about a definition of the role of supervision, or the three basic: completing a task, assessing your group members, keeping the group in working order. Then we wanted you to consider possibly rearranging those goals, and that the foundation to completing tasks is actually to have a very good assessment and understanding of the individuals within your working group, and to create a situation so that the group is in good working order. We talked about some tools that you already have in your toolbox, your assumptions and theoretical position around development, change, and learning, your use of social authority or power, and we talked about the 5 faces of that. You'll have the situational intervention model that we talked about. And then we talked about weathering the storm and the concept of group climate, climate fostering behaviors, and the effects of supportive and defensive climates on behavior. So that was it. I'd like to leave you with a final thought. The real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing at the right time, but also to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. Thank you very much for your time and consideration. See you next time.